Hello, good morning. So welcome to the second session of our the second PowerPoint presentation for our English subject, English 9 for the third quarter. So thank you very much, first of all, for tuning in, for uh, buying yourself load so that you can watch this video. So this video that we're going to explore will be about our three lessons for the third quarter for English 9. So this is gonna be an introduction. It's up to you guys to browse through your modules to go over your modules and learn more about the topics. This is just an introduction. So I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna discuss to you some of the most important parts of the lessons, and then yeah, I'm gonna guide you throughout the lessons and maybe ano sa ba? Talk about stuff that are not on the module, you know, but are also very important. Okay, so without further ado, let's start. So this is these are our lessons for for the third quarter. So for module one, we have biases and prejudices. Okay, so these are biases and prejudices. So for the module two, we're going to talk about relevance and truthfulness of ideas. So these are relevance and truthfulness of ideas. Now, module three is a bit more, related to the previous module. It's relevance and truthfulness of ideas presented in material viewed. So it's just two lessons, biases and prejudices, and relevance and truthfulness of ideas. But the third one is related to the second one. So yeah, these are all three modules that we are going to talk about for English 9. Again, this is just an introduction. We are not going to talk about all of the topics. We are just going to browse over them. Okay, and it's up to you guys to research further and to open your modules and try to learn more. Okay, so let's start. So for modules 1 to 3, we are going to talk about these four keywords. So we have four keywords here. We have bias, we have prejudice, we have relevance, and we have truthfulness. So throughout modules 1 to 3 for the third quarter, these are the four keywords that we are going to explore. Okay. So I know that a lot of you are already familiar with the word bias because we often use this in reference to K-pop idols, right? For example, for Blackpink, we have our biases. We have, for example, if you like Lisa, Lisa is your bias. So for me, for myself, I am also a K-pop. Uh, I don't know. I can't say that I'm a K-pop lover, but I like K-pop, and specifically, I like Red Velvet. So my bias in Red Velvet is Wendy. So I like Wendy, so she's my bias. But we're not gonna be talking about that kind of bias. We are going to talk about another kind of bias. It's a it's the original meaning that we're gonna be talking about. Okay, so next one is prejudice. Prejudice is it comes from the morpheme Jude. I would like you to notice the syllable here, Jude, Jud. When you see that, it probably means, or it probably relates to judgment. So remember the word judge, judgment, judiciary, prejudice. So if you see Jude, it it's probably related to justice. So we have prejudice, we have relevance, and also truthfulness. So for bias, now this is now the definition or the description that we are going to talk about for bias. So again, we need to be familiar with all these uh, keywords so that we may be able to understand further the lessons. Okay. So the first one is bias. Bias is a tendency to believe that some people, ideas, etc., are better than others. That usually result in treating some people unfairly. So this is a tendency. This is your inclination. This probably happens when you believe that some people are better than others or some ideas are better than others. Okay. So that's it. Prejudice is a feeling of like or dislike for someone or something, especially when it's not reasonable or logical. So prejudice is a bit different. I mean, it's not like having crushes, okay? It doesn't mean that you like someone, it means that you, I mean, you have a crush on someone. What we mean here is that there's this feeling that you feel comfortable toward a person or an idea, okay, without actually knowing more about them, without actually doing research. So it's like that. Um, when somebody comes up, for example, when you are with your friends and somebody comes up, somebody somebody joins you and you don't know this person, immediately you would try to observe this person and then you would make judgments about the person without necessarily knowing the person first, right? So for example, when you see them holding a knife, for example, that's an extreme case. So if you see them holding a knife, of course you won't gonna be feeling comfortable with that, right? But if you see them, for example, if they approach the team or the barcada in a very nice way, in a very polite way, if they look fresh, if they look attractive, of course, you might want to befriend them, right? You might want them to sit beside you, right? Or to sit in front of you so that you can see them all the time. So it's like that. It's prejudice, okay? It's a feeling of like or dislike towards someone or towards something without you doing research first, okay? By the way, when I say prejudice, I want you to also notice the pre here. Okay, this pre. Pre means before. So when you prejudice, you judge before. You make a judgment before actually doing research. Okay, so that's prejudice. Next one, we have relevance. When we talk about relevance, it means connected with the matter at hand. When I say connected, it means it's linked. Okay, it talks about the thing that we're talking about. Okay, for example, if we're talking about K-pop, for example, talking about Blackpink, talking about Red Velvet, talking about Twice. So all the other K-pop groups are relevant to this discussion of K-pop. Okay, when you mention BTS, for example, when you mention Girls' Generation, these are K-pop groups, right? So mentioning them is relevant. It's connected to the matter or to the subject or to the topic, which is K-pop. If you suddenly talk about Air Supply, Air Supply, it's an American band. If you suddenly talk about an old Beatles, for example, if you suddenly talk about the Beatles or the Bee Gees, it's it's not gonna be relevant to the subject. It's not gonna be relevant to the topic of K-pop, right? So again, when you talk about relevance, it means it's connected, it's linked to the subject that we're talking about. Okay. Now we're gonna move on to truthfulness. These words are very familiar to you, especially this one. I think this is the most familiar to you. Truthfulness, it's containing or expressing the truth. Okay. So when something is true, it's truthful, right? So the question here is, how do you know that it's true, right? How do you know that it's relevant? How do you know that you're prejudicing already? How do you know that you're doing bias? So these are the things that we're going to be talking about throughout this podcast, okay, or throughout this video. Okay. So I've highlighted here some of the keywords within these keywords. So for bias, it's a tendency to believe. Okay. When you believe something without research or something, that's bias. Okay. Prejudice is a feeling of like or dislike. So this is the keyword here, or these are the keywords here. Relevance, it's connected. Okay, it's linked. Uh, it's related. Okay. Truthfulness, it means the truth, right? So these are the keywords for these keywords, for the four keywords for the third quarter of English 9. So right here, we see an image of a woman winnowing rice. So kung sa Bisaya pa, unsa ni siya? Sa tawag na, nagpili og bugas. Okay? So in English, it's winnowing. It's Winnowing. It's winnowing. So this woman right here is winnowing rice. Why do I have this picture right here? What do you think? Why do I have this picture on this presentation? Okay, you're right, Char. Murag na dyan ito bag. Okay, so yeah. So the reason why I placed this picture here is that uh, when you know, when you're doing bias, when you're doing prejudice, when you're doing relevance, the practice of, you know, uh, seeking relevance or truthfulness, you're actually you're like, I mean, you're actually doing winnowing in a sense, because you're looking for the truthfulness of the thing. You're looking for the rice, for the proper rice, right? When you're looking for the relevance, you're actually trying to separate the rice from the other stuff, for example, from the other leaves, from the small rocks that would, that's also with the rice. So it's like winnowing is also the process, is symbolically the process of getting what is relevant and what is truthful, right? And I would just also like to highlight that, bias and prejudice sound negative. They are actually, because when you are biased, you tend to be unfair. When you prejudice, you tend to discriminate or to dislike. But sometimes these are positive things. When you are biased towards the truth, for example, when your bias is truth, everything that you do must be related to the truth. So you can't be dishonest if your bias is the truth, right? If you're also practicing prejudice, that's sometimes practical and positive. Remember my example a while ago, when there's a person coming into the group bringing a knife. Okay, so uh, prejudicing the person, that person is probably dangerous, is not bad, because you're actually defending yourselves. You're actually defending yourself and your friends, or your family, right? So bias and prejudice are sometimes uh positive things. Okay, so yeah, it's winnowing. These four is symbolically winnowing. So let's focus now on biases and prejudices. So when you say bias, again, you believe or you don't believe this something because this is what you already think. So I want you to look at the photo right here at the right part of the slide. As you can see, there's a man with a lot of tattoos on his skin. It's probably occupying his upper body. Okay. In our culture, in our context here in the Philippines, or perhaps here in Davao City, if we see someone who has a lot of tattoos, maybe we may think that the person is, is not necessarily a good person, right? We might feel a little bit we might feel a little discomfort when we're around them. Some of us would feel like these people are cool people, right? Like they're artists, they're expressive, and they're generally cool. So if your belief is that people who have tattoos are criminals, for example, they're bad people, your interaction towards them would be negative, or you would be aloof. For example, if you see this kind of person, you wouldn't be near them. But if you feel that they are cool, you would be near them. You would talk to them. You would ask about their tattoos. You would ask about the images, right? The histories of these tattoos. So there's a basis there, because you see, uh, what you think about these people, these are not these are not arbitrary. Okay, when you talk about arbitrary, these are not they did not come from out of nowhere, right? uh they have reasons for being there. For example, perhaps your parents told you that people who have tattoos are dangerous, or perhaps you have parents or guardians or teachers who discouraged you from meeting persons with tattoos. If you experience that while you are young, you would probably, feel the same if you see a person who has a lot of tattoos, right? So it's like that. So that's how bias works. There are moments in your life, in your history, that have shaped your belief about a certain thing. So it's a mental shortcut, right? It's it's a shortcut, really, because our minds, they try to conserve energy, right? Everything tries to conserve energy. If you think a lot, you would spend a lot of energy. So the mind would try to not think a lot. So the mind would make shortcuts. And this is one of the shortcut making of the mind. The mind creates biases. So it's like that. By the way, when you say mental shortcuts, it means heuristics. Okay. So it's like that. Now, there are a lot of biases. So these are some of the examples of biases. We have cognitive bias. Under them, we have anchoring, attribution bias, and self-serving bias. So we're going to talk about these things. So it's very interesting, cognitive bias, because these are the mental shortcuts that we do perhaps every day, right? So I want you to be conscious about this. So when talk about anchoring, uh, I know that you've experienced this. When somebody offers you something and then offers you another thing, for example, a person offers you uh, a lollipop, too basic, right? A person offers you a lollipop, and then the same person offers you a candy, perhaps kopiko na candy, kopiko ba na siya? Tapos the other one is a lollipop na sa ba? Basta, it's a lollipop. So, people would tend to choose the first one just because it's the first one offered. No other reason. Most of the people would choose the first one offered to them just because it's the first one being offered. That's anchoring. Okay. So you anchor, murag mo stick ka dito ba sa first. So it's it's a cognitive bias. It's a shortcut. It's a mental shortcut because instead of actually thinking about how to decide whether to choose the lollipop or the candy, you would just rather pick the first one offered, which is the lollipop. So it's like that, right? So this happens a lot. This happens a lot. For example, when you're in an eatery sa karinderya, right? Uh, you already have this idea of what you want to eat. But if you don't have this idea of what you want to eat, and then you browse through the casseroles, tanawan mo itong mga kaldero, ana. If you see them, if you see sinigang first, nabonag ka ng init-init pa ganyan, tapos medyo lami kay gnaong ba? If you see sinigang first, and then there are other viands around. For example, na diniguan, na ay sobrang na ibalbakwa, na yun sa the tendency is that you would base your decision on the sinigang because it's the first one you saw. So, pag nagani mas lami pa sa sinigang, mao yung pilion. Pag nagani dili mas lami sa sinigang, katong sinigang yung pilion. So, you're anchoring your decision on the first one that you saw. So it's just like that. Okay. That's anchoring. Now we also have attribution bias. This is the most common thing I think for you guys who are in grade 9. Di ba mo na inyong parents na mao na sige cellphone when you feel fever, for example, or headache, or bisag gani ka ng mga unrelated na like kana mo piang na ka or sipuno na ka. Ngayon sila mo na sige mo kang cellphone. So they think that because you're using a phone, you're experiencing sickness na. So they think that you are lazy for using a phone, and that is now the result. Your sickness is now the result of you using the phone. So it's an attribution bias. You tend to think that a person experiences bad things because the person is bad, right? If you think that the person is lazy and that person is always on the phone, and that person suddenly feels ill, you would think that the person is ill because he is lazy, right? So that's attribution bias. Another example is that if you see a student, if you see your classmate, for example, let's rewind back to a time when there's still no COVID. Okay, so I want you to remember your classmate. Remember that classmate was always late, right? What do you think about that classmate? Do you think that that classmate is, you know, hardworking? Do you think that that classmate of yours is unsa ba kanang studious, sige study? Kana na ba siya? More often than not, we would think that those people who are always late are lazy, or they just don't wake up early. They just don't know how to manage their time. So we tend to judge people because we think that their lifestyle or their personality is wrong, and then it results on, for example, lateness or tardiness or anything that's bad. So if we think that a person is bad because the person is bad, that is attribution bias. Because sometimes a person becomes bad not because he is actually bad, but because there are situations you know that made him bad. Okay, for example, let's go back to the tardiness thing. I told you a while ago to recall that classmate who is very lazy, or who is often tardy. Okay, there are a lot of reasons why this person is late. Maybe that person is a working student. Maybe that person experiences depression every night. Maybe that person would wake up early to earn and to find breakfast, but it's just that the time is not enough. That's why he would come to school late. So it doesn't mean that the person is always late. It means that the person is tardy. I mean, is the person is lazy. So you see the point here. We can't say that the person is bad because the person is failing. If you do that, you're doing attribution bias. Okay. Another one is self-serving bias. Bias. It's self-serving bias. What is this? This is thinking that you're always right. Okay. Self-serving bias is the thinking that you're always right. Uh, you see, we have this tendency to, to label ourselves, to categorize ourselves. For example, that we are better than some other people, right? I know that you think that you are better than some other people. You're better than this classmate, right? And at the same time, you also think that this other classmate is also better than you, diba? So actually, we compare ourselves to other people, right? And it's just normal that we compare ourselves to other people. What's not normal is doing that every time. But let's go back. We think that there are people who are better than us, and we also think that we sometimes are better than other people. Now, if there's another person that you think is lesser than you, meaning you're better than that person, and both of you are deciding on something. For example, both of you are deciding on where to eat. Okay, you would always think that your decision would always be better because you think that you are the better person. So if the other person suggests that you eat in Jollibee, for example, and you think that you're better, so you suggest that you eat in McDonald's. So you would feel that the McDonald's decision is better than the Jollibee decision. Not because it's actually better, but because you think you're better than the other person, right? So that's self-serving bias. So you see, it's very interesting because we do this, right? Nobody's exempted. Okay. So now let's proceed to the next one, to the next slide. So we also have gender bias. So gender bias is, if you believe that one gender is better than the other, or the other gender is lesser than the other. For example, if you think that men are better than women, that is a gender bias, right? So thing is, there are things that women can do that men can't do, and there are things that men can do that women can't, 'di ba? So naay mabuhat ang isa ka sex, madili mabuhat sa isa. So I think there are differences, but it doesn't mean that one is better than the other. Wala nagpasabot nga mas okay ang lalaki kaysa sa babae or mas okay ang babae kaysa sa lalaki. It depends actually on the situation. So it's like that. If you think that one gender is better than the other, you're committing gender bias. Another one is religious bias. Excuse me. If you think that, religion, one religion is better than the other, I know that you think like that. If you are a devout Catholic, you would think that other religions are wrong, right? If you're a devout if you're a devout Jehovah's Witness, you would think that other religions are wrong, right? You would think that the Pope is wrong. You would think that that Pastor Apollo C. Kibuloy is wrong, right? Just because you belong in another religion other than pastor's religion. It's also self-serving bias, right? If you belong in, for example, in Iglesia ni Cristo, and then you bash Pastor Kibuloy because he is Pastor Kibuloy, and people in their religion are they are not thinking. You think that they're not thinking. So That's also self-serving bias, but at the same time, it's also a religious bias because you're basing your belief on religion. You know, so it's like that. Agenda setting. This is very interesting. This applies on media, on stations, on media stations. Agenda setting is, uh, uh, delivering delivering the same news over and over again to appear that that news is important. Okay, so agenda setting is setting up something as important. That is agenda setting. Uh, I don't know if you still remember this, but way back in 2016, when we had our previous presidential election, we didn't have advertisements or mentions of President Duterte because you know he was then not very relevant or not very important. The agenda or the setting that has I mean the agenda that was set way back then was Marojas and Grace Poe, because those are the two most influential candidates back in those times. But when Rodrigo Duterte, suddenly rose up in terms of the surveys, so nadto na saya ang balita. And because of that, he got more famous. And I don't know if it was agenda setting, but it could be an agenda setting. Maybe the media tried to uh, to make news about Duterte frequently so that people would remember that so that people would remember Rodrigo Duterte and vote for him in the coming elections. Maybe they did that. Maybe they didn't. We don't know. But fast forward to today, we see in media outlets who are the ones who we see now in media outlets who are the candidates that they think are important, right? For example, I want you to recall the Jessica Soho interviews for the presidential candidates, right? They invited five candidates. They invited Ping Lacson, they invited Marcos, they invited Leni Robredo, they also invited Pacquiao and Isko Moreno, right? They invited five candidates. Marcos did not attend, right? He declined. So there were only four candidates interviewed. But did you know that there are more than five presidential candidates? At that time, there were eight, I think. Eight or six. There were six presidential candidates. And this sixth presidential candidate was Calio de Guzman, right? Now Caliodi was not invited. Okay. So there's an agenda setting there that only these five presidential candidates are important. Caliode and the others are not. That's agenda setting. Okay. Implicit bias. So the implicit bias is the bias that we think we don't have, but we do have. Right. These are the biases that we think we're not doing, but actually we are doing. For example, uh, when you talk to someone, right? For example, your friend, and another friend comes in while you are talking with your other friend, and then this new friend that came in asks you something, and you stop the conversation to answer that friend. You are thinking implicitly inside your mind, you're categorizing these two friends of yours. You are already thinking that one person is better than the other because you canceled the conversation with your first friend and answered the question of the second friend. it means that you think that the second friend is better than the first friend. See? So that's implicit bias. This is more of an implicit bias if the question was not important or urgent. If the question was urgent, of course, you would answer the second friend. But if the question was, it's just a trivial question, it means that you like your second friend more than the first friend, right? So it's unfair. So that's it. That's implicit bias. So before we proceed to prejudice, let's have a quick break. So you can go to the comfort room, or drink water, not from the comfort room. Okay. So let's just have a 2-minute break. Okay. So after 2 minutes, we proceed to prejudice.